Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Vegeta became a Green Lantern? Subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And also check the description. So let's begin the story. The wastelands beyond West City held a particular kind of silence that Vegeta had come to crave. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of expectation. Out here, where the cracked earth stretched endlessly beneath a sky bleeding from orange to purple, there were no Z-fighters gathering for another pointless social ritual. No Bulma watching him with that penetrating gaze that somehow saw past every wall he'd constructed. No Trunks looking at him with the kind of reverence that felt like accusation. Out here, there was only the rhythmic impact of fist against stone, the crack of bones that would heal before morning, and the steady burn of muscles pushed past their limits for the 1000th time that week. Vegeta's knuckles were split again, blood mixing with the dust coating his hands as he drove another combination into the rock formation he'd been using as a target for the past 3 hours. The stone had long since developed a crater where his strikes landed, but he didn't move to a fresh surface. There was something satisfying about deepening the same wound, about the way the rock shuddered with each impact as if it understood its purpose was to break. Left cross. Right hook. Uppercut. The sequence was automatic, refined through decades of combat into something approaching muscle memory, though calling it that implied thoughtlessness. Vegeta was never thoughtless in combat. Each strike was calculated, precise, delivered with the exact amount of force required to maximize damage while conserving energy for the next exchange. It was the efficiency that Kakarot lacked, that careless expenditure of power that somehow always seemed to be enough. The thought made his next punch land harder than intended, and a chunk of rock the size of his head broke free, tumbling down the formation's face before shattering at his feet. He stepped back, breathing measured despite the exertion, and looked at his hands. The blood was already clotting, the minor damage knitting itself back together through sheer Saiyan resilience. By tomorrow, there would be no trace of tonight's training. By tomorrow, he would be exactly as strong as he was today, perhaps fractionally stronger, if he was lucky, though those incremental gains felt increasingly like mockery. The sky had darkened while he worked, stars beginning to emerge in the deepening blue. Vegeta didn't look at them. Stars reminded him of space, and space reminded him of before Earth, before Bulma, before he traded the title of Conqueror for the dubious honor of being the second strongest fighter on a backwater planet that somehow kept attracting universe-ending threats. Second strongest. The word sat in his chest like a stone he'd swallowed and never managed to digest. He powered up without thinking about it, letting his ki flare around him in a white-gold aura that cast harsh shadows across the wasteland. The familiar surge of energy was comforting in its reliability, the one thing he could control when everything else seemed subject to Kakarot's inexplicable ability to surpass every limit. Super Saiyan Blue flooded through him, and for a moment, just a moment, he felt like the warrior he was supposed to be. Then the moment passed, as it always did, and he was left standing alone in the wasteland, powerful enough to destroy planets, but not powerful enough to close the gap that mattered. Vegeta powered down and turned away from the ruined rock formation, fully intending to return to Capsule Corp and endure another evening of Bulma's carefully neutral observations about his training schedule. She never said he was overdoing it, but the implication hung in the space between her words like smoke. That was when he saw it. At first he thought it was a shooting star, a streak of emerald light cutting through the darkening sky, moving with purpose rather than the random trajectory of space debris. His combat instincts engaged automatically, body shifting into a ready stance as he tracked the object's approach. It was heading directly toward him, decelerating in a way that suggested intelligence rather than natural ballistic motion. Vegeta raised one hand, ki already gathering in his palm. If this was another invasion, another threat thinking Earth was easy prey, he would disabuse it of that notion before it ever touched ground. The light descended with increasing speed, and as it drew closer, he could make out details. A glowing sphere about the size of his fist, leaving a trail of emerald energy in its wake. The color was wrong for any attack he recognized. Not the purple of Beerus's destructive energy, not the pink of Majin Buu's magic, not even the varied hues of ki he'd encountered across the galaxy. This was something else entirely. The sphere stopped 20 feet above him, hovering in a way that defied conventional physics. Vegeta's eyes narrowed, analyzing threat level, searching for the telltale signs of explosive energy or concealed weaponry. But the object simply waited, as if taking his measure in return. Then it spoke. The voice had no clear source, seeming to emanate from the light itself, mechanical yet somehow carrying an undertone of something almost alive, as if the words were being shaped by an intelligence that existed partially in frequencies beyond normal hearing. Vegeta of Universe 7. You have the ability to overcome great fear. The analysis was instant and instinctive. Vegeta's ki flared, and the sphere was suddenly encased in his energy, compressed by forces that could crack moons. I don't know what you are, he said, voice low and dangerous, but if you think to judge me, this is not judgment. This is recognition. The words gave him pause, though he didn't release his hold on the sphere. Recognition implied understanding, implied that whatever this was knew something about him. That possibility was more unsettling than a simple attack would have been. Explain yourself, he demanded. Now. Or I'll reduce you to atoms and scatter them across this wasteland. The sphere pulsed, its light intensifying despite the crushing force surrounding it. Vegeta felt a moment of grudging respect. Whatever this object was, it possessed considerable durability. I am a Green Lantern power ring, the voice continued, unperturbed by the threat. Created by the guardians of the universe to be wielded by those with the strongest wills. I have traveled across galaxies, scanning sentient beings, searching for one worthy of bearing this power. In this sector, in this universe, you are the one whose will burns brightest. Vegeta's grip on the sphere loosened fractionally, curiosity warring with suspicion. Will, he repeated, the word tasting strange in his mouth. It wasn't a concept he often examined consciously. Will was simply what you had, the thing that kept you standing when your body screamed to fall, the thing that pushed you past limits because accepting limits was unthinkable. Affirmative. The power of the Green Lantern Corps is fueled by willpower, the determination to overcome any obstacle, to face any fear, to impose order on chaos through sheer force of conviction. I have analyzed the emotional spectrum readings of every being on this planet. None approach the intensity of your will. Not even Kakarot? The question emerged before Vegeta could stop it, and he immediately hated himself for asking, for letting his eternal measuring against that low-class warrior show through. There was a pause, as if the ring was considering how to phrase its response. The Saiyan called Son Goku possesses formidable willpower. However, his will is tempered by connections, by trust in others, by a flexibility that allows him to adapt rather than overcome. Your will is different. It is absolute. Unyielding. It has been forged in circumstances that would have broken lesser beings, yet you have not merely endured, you have transformed suffering into strength, humiliation into determination, limitation into obsession. The ring continued, its voice taking on an almost clinical quality. You watched your planet burn. You survived servitude under a tyrant. You have fought beings that should have destroyed you, and when defeated, you did not accept defeat, you used it as fuel. This is the will we seek, not the will that endures, but the will that refuses to be contained. Vegeta released his hold on the sphere entirely, his mind racing through implications. A weapon powered by willpower, a power that responded to determination itself, that grew stronger the more unyielding the bearer. If what this ring claimed was true, show me, he said abruptly. If this power is real, prove it, extend your hand. He hesitated, and in that hesitation recognized the truth about himself that he rarely acknowledged. Despite everything, despite his pride and his power, there was a part of him that feared accepting gifts from unknown sources. Every power he'd ever received from others had come with strings attached. The Beatty's magic, the Blutz wave generator, even the training with Whis carried the implicit debt of obligation. But the ring had said his will was strongest. And if there was one thing Vegeta knew absolutely, it was that his will could not be broken. Not by Frieza, not by the humiliation of watching Kakarot surpass him time and again, not by anything. If this ring thought to control him, it would learn the limits of its own power quickly enough. He extended his right hand palm up, and watched as the sphere descended toward him. The moment it touched his skin, the world changed. Green light exploded outward from his hand, not like ki but like something fundamental being rewritten in reality itself. Vegeta felt the ring slip onto his finger. Middle finger, right hand, settling into place with a sensation like it had always belonged there. The metal was warm, almost alive, and he could feel something vast connecting to him through that point of contact. Energy poured into him, and his first instinct was to resist it, to push it back with his own ki. But the ring's power flowed around his resistance like water around stone, not forcing its way in but simply being there, waiting to be shaped by his will. Vegeta of Universe 7, the voice spoke again, but now it resonated inside his mind, intimate and undeniable. You have been chosen. Speak the oath, and become a member of the Green Lantern Corps. Words appeared in his consciousness, somehow placed there by the ring, a formal oath, the kind of ceremonial nonsense he'd always despised. But as he read them, felt them settle into his awareness, something unexpected happened. They didn't feel empty. They felt like a promise he'd been waiting his entire life to make, not to these mysterious guardians but to himself, to the memory of his father, of his race, of every humiliation he'd endured while swearing that someday, somehow, he would rise above it all. The words came, and they tasted like vindication. In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light. The wasteland erupted in emerald radiance. Power flooded through Vegeta like nothing he'd ever experienced, and he'd experienced transformations that multiplied his strength thousands of times over. This was different. This wasn't his body adapting or his ki expanding. This was reality itself bending to acknowledge his will, waiting to be shaped according to his intent. The ring pulsed on his finger, and instinctively, without conscious thought, he reached for that power. A construct materialized in his left hand, a sword, 6 feet long, its blade edged with energy that hummed with lethal potential. The weapon felt perfect, balanced exactly as he would have designed it, because it was designed by him, shaped from pure will into crystallized form. Vegeta stared at the construct, his analytical mind already racing through implications. This wasn't like ki techniques that required specific training, memorized forms, years of practice to master. This was direct translation of intent into reality. If he could imagine it clearly enough, well, it was sufficient intensity, the ring would make it real. He dismissed the sword with a thought, and created a shield instead, heavy, spiked, brutally efficient. Then armor, covering his torso in emerald plates that felt solid yet moved with him as naturally as his own skin. Then a battalion of energy spears, hovering in the air around him, each one awaiting his command to strike. The possibilities were staggering. And yet, Vegeta powered up to Super Saiyan, his golden aura mixing with the green light of the ring, and felt the construct spears waver slightly, as if the two power sources were interfering with each other. He focused, willing them to stabilize, and they did, but it took concentration, required him to maintain awareness of both his ki and the ring's energy simultaneously. Interesting. The ring was powerful. Perhaps more powerful than anything he'd encountered, but it wasn't without limitations. It required focus, demanded clarity of will, which meant it could be mastered, trained, refined into something devastating in the hands of someone who actually understood combat. In the hands of someone like him, a presence entered his awareness, Bulma's ki signature, approaching in one of her aircraft. He'd been out here longer than intended, apparently, though time had become slippery once he'd started experimenting with the ring's capabilities. Vegeta dismissed all his constructs with a thought, watching them dissolve into particles of light, and powered down from Super Saiyan. The ring remained, a band of emerald metal on his finger, its surface occasionally pulsing with inner light. He could feel it there, a weight that was both physical and something more, a connection to power that thrummed with potential. When Bulma's aircraft landed and she stepped out, her expression was carefully neutral, which meant she was deeply concerned but had decided not to lead with that. Vegeta knew her well enough by now to read the subtleties. The way her gaze immediately went to his bloodied hands, then to his face, searching for signs of whatever had kept him out past midnight, then finally settling on the ring. Her eyes widened. Vegeta, what is that? A weapon, he said simply, because it was true enough. Something that found me. Bulma approached slowly, her scientist's curiosity evident in the way she studied the ring without immediately reaching for it. That's not any technology one recognizes. The energy signature is completely alien, not like ki, not like any power source I've cataloged. Where did it come from? Space. He saw her expression and elaborated slightly. It claimed to be something called a Green Lantern Power Ring. created by beings called guardians, powered by willpower. He raised his hand, letting the ring catch the moonlight. It chose me. Chose you, Bulma repeated, and now her concern was fully visible. Vegeta, you realize how suspicious that sounds, right? Random alien artifact shows up and just decides you're its new owner? That's usually how bad things start. I'm aware. He lowered his hand. Which is why I'll be monitoring its behavior carefully. But the power is real, Bulma. It responds to will, to determination. It creates constructs from pure energy based on what I imagine. He paused, considering how to explain what he'd felt. It's like, if Ki was external instead of internal. If reality itself could be shaped by sufficiently strong conviction. Bulma pulled out a small scanner from her jacket. Of course she'd brought equipment, she always brought equipment, and pointed it at the ring. The device immediately began displaying readings that made her frown. The energy output is enormous. Vegeta, this thing is generating power at levels comparable to your Super Saiyan forms. And it's reactive. Look at this. She turned the scanner so he could see the fluctuating graph. Every time your emotional state shifts, the power spikes. When you mentioned its capabilities just now, your determination increased slightly, and the ring's output jumped 30%. He looked at the ring with new appreciation. So it grows stronger the more intensely I will it to. Or the more intense you become, Bulma corrected, worry creeping into her voice. Vegeta, you're already someone who pushes everything to extremes. If this ring amplifies that tendency, then I'll be stronger than ever, he finished, not seeing the problem. Isn't that what's required? Every threat we face escalates. Frieza, Cell, Bu, Beerus, each one more powerful than the last. This ring might finally give me the edge I need to. He stopped himself, but not before Bulma's expression sharpened with understanding. To surpass Goku, she said quietly. That's what this is about. Don't. The word came out harsher than intended. Don't psychoanalyze me, Bulma. You know what I am. You know what drives me. This ring recognizes that. It chose me precisely because my will is absolute. That's what worries me. She stepped closer, putting a hand on his arm, the one without the ring. Vegeta, I love you. And part of what I love is that incredible determination, that refusal to give up or back down. But sometimes... She paused, choosing words carefully. Sometimes the things we think are our greatest strengths are also the things that can destroy us if we're not careful. He wanted to dismiss her concern, to tell her she didn't understand, that she couldn't possibly comprehend what it meant to be constantly measured against someone who shouldn't even exist as a warrior. Kakarot was a low-class Saiyan raised on a backwater planet with no formal training, no royal lineage, no right to the power he wielded. And yet, the ring pulsed warm against his finger, as if responding to the surge of emotion. Vegeta looked down at it, at the way green light reflected in Bulma's eyes, and made a decision. I'll be careful, he said, and meant it. But I'm not giving this up. If it chose me, there's a reason. And I intend to discover what I'm capable of with this power. Bulma studied him for a long moment, then sighed. I know I can't stop you. I've never been able to stop you when you set your mind to something. But promise me you'll let me study that ring, figure out how it works, make sure it's not. I don't know, mind controlling you or slowly poisoning you or something. It's not mind control, Vegeta said with certainty. He could feel the ring's power, alien and vast, but it was responding to his will, not imposing its own. If anything, it's the opposite. It amplifies what's already there. That's what I'm afraid of, Bulma muttered, but she smiled slightly. Come on, it's late. Trunks wanted to show you something before bed, and I'm not telling our son that his father was too busy playing with his new alien jewelry to come home. Vegeta almost objected to the characterization but stopped himself. There would be time enough to explore the ring's capabilities, to master its power, to discover what a Saiyan prince could accomplish with willpower made manifest. For now, Bulma was right. He had responsibilities that existed beyond his eternal quest for strength. Though as he followed her back to the aircraft, he couldn't help but create one more construct, a small sphere of green light that floated above his palm, perfectly controlled, containing enough compressed energy to level a city block. He held it there, feeling the way it responded to his intent with zero lag, perfect accuracy. The sphere dissolved, and Vegeta smiled, not the bitter expression that had become habitual, but something closer to genuine satisfaction. The ring had called him the strongest will in this sector. It was time to prove that assessment correct. That night, alone in the gravity chamber while Bulma and Trunks slept, Vegeta stood in 500 times Earth's gravity, and held his hand up to examine the ring. This was his element: solitude, crushing pressure, the methodical process of pushing past limits through sheer refusal to accept them. The ring glowed softly in the darkness, casting green shadows across the chamber's reinforced walls. Vegeta closed his eyes and reached for its power, not with the explosive force he'd used in the wasteland but with surgical precision, testing boundaries and tolerances. A construct formed, his father, King Vegeta, rendered in perfect detail down to the skull lines around his eyes and the way his cape fell across his shoulders. The image stood before him, silent and judging, exactly as Vegeta remembered from fragmented childhood memories. He studied the construct, noting how stable it was, how it required minimal concentration to maintain once established. The ring didn't just create simple shapes. It could reproduce complex forms, store templates, maintain multiple constructs simultaneously if his will was strong enough to divide his attention. Vegeta dismissed his father's image and created something else: Frieza's final form, the tyrant rendered in emerald light, perfect in every detail except for the color. The construct stood before him, and Vegeta felt his ki surge in automatic response, battle instinct recognizing the threat even though he knew intellectually that this was merely light and would give in form. He raised one hand and fired a ki blast directly at the construct. The emerald Frieza exploded into fragments, but Vegeta was already rebuilding it, using the ring to reform the scattered pieces into the whole. Destruction and creation, flowing together, limited only by how fast he could impose his will on reality. The possibilities were intoxicating. He could create armies, weapons, shields, prison cells. He could shape terrain, construct fortifications, trap enemies in solid energy. And all of it flowed from his determination, grew stronger the more intensely he refused to let reality remain unchanged by his presence. A Saiyans' power came from their fighting spirit, from the joy of battle and the rage of near-death experiences. The ring's power came from will. And what was will but refined battle spirit, concentrated into pure determination? In a way, this ring was the perfect weapon for a Saiyan, especially one who had spent his entire life imposing his will on the universe through sheer refusal to accept any other outcome. Vegeta created construct after construct, filling the gravity chamber with an army of warriors, Saiyans, Frieza Force soldiers, even a replica of Cell. Each one was perfect, each one stable, and maintaining all of them simultaneously felt less like strain and more like flexing a muscle he'd never known he possessed. Then he tried something more complex. Instead of recreating things he'd seen, he designed something new, a construct of himself, Super Saiyan Blue, engaged in combat with a construct of Kakarot in the same form. He set them fighting, maintaining both simultaneously, observing the techniques each one used. The Vegeta construct fought with brutal efficiency, every movement calculated for maximum impact with minimum wasted motion. The Kakarot construct fought with that maddening adaptability, that instinctive sense for openings and opportunities. Watching them clash, Vegeta began to see patterns in his own fighting style. Places where he prioritized pride over pragmatism, moments where his determination to win his way interfered with simply winning. It was a disquieting realization, seeing his own flaws made manifest in green light. He dismissed both constructs and stood alone in the gravity chamber, breathing steady despite the crushing pressure. The ring pulsed on his finger, and he could feel something in its energy, not quite communication, but a sense of satisfaction. Recognition? As if the ring itself approved of how thoroughly he was exploring its capabilities. I am Vegeta, he thought at the ring, not sure if it could sense his thoughts but not caring. Prince of all Saiyans. You chose me because my will is absolute. You chose correctly, but understand this, I am not your wielder. You are my weapon. You will serve my purposes, respond to my will, and help me achieve what I've spent my life pursuing. The ring pulsed brighter, and Vegeta felt a wordless response flow through the connection. Not agreement or disagreement, but something more fundamental. The ring was a tool, yes, but it was a tool designed to be wielded only by those with sufficient will to master it. It would grant him power beyond imagining, but that power would be constrained by one absolute limitation: his own determination, which meant there was no limitation at all. Vegeta smiled in the darkness and began creating constructs again, each one more complex than the last, pushing the boundaries of what the ring could accomplish when wielded by someone who had never, in his entire life, accepted the concept of impossible. Outside the gravity chamber, Bulma stood at the observation window, her scanner displaying readings that made her stomach tight with worry. The ring's energy output had been climbing steadily for the past hour, and Vegeta's brainwave patterns showed the kind of focused intensity she'd only seen when he was on the verge of a breakthrough, or a breakdown. She pressed her hand against the glass and whispered to the man inside, knowing he couldn't hear her, "Please be careful. Please don't let this thing consume you." But Vegeta couldn't hear her, and even if he could, Bulma wasn't sure it would have mattered. She'd fallen in love with a man defined by his absolute refusal to accept limits, and now something had found him that promised to make that refusal reality. All she could do was watch, document, and hope that when the consequences came, and they would come, she was certain of that, she could help him survive them. In the gravity chamber, wreathed in emerald light and crushing pressure, Vegeta continued to explore the depths of power that flowed from pure, unyielding will. The ring had chosen him. It had chosen correctly, and he would prove to the universe, to Kakarot, to these guardians, to himself, that there was no force in existence that could constrain a will that refused, absolutely refused, to be contained. The night stretched on, and the green light never wavered. The transition happened without warning, without permission, without even the courtesy of a moment to brace himself. 1 second Vegeta stood in the gravity chamber, mid-combination against the construct of perfect cell, his movements fluid despite the crushing 500 times gravity that would have liquefied a normal being. The next second, reality twisted, not violently, but with the absolute certainty of something fundamental being rewritten, and he was somewhere else entirely. His combat instincts engaged before conscious thought, ki flaring around him in a defensive barrier as he assessed the new environment. No gravity chamber. No capsule corp. Instead, he stood in what appeared to be some kind of vast courtyard, the ground beneath his feet a material he didn't recognize, crystalline yet solid, gleaming with an inner light that suggested technology far beyond Earth's capabilities. The sky above was wrong, stars visible despite what his internal clock insisted should be mid-morning, their configurations utterly alien to any system he'd traveled through during his years in Friesia's service. And surrounding him, in a formation that was clearly deliberate and unmistakably defensive, were hundreds of beings wreathed in the same emerald light that pulsed from his ring. Vegeta's first impulse was to attack. These creatures had abducted him, transported him against his will, and that was an offense that warranted immediate and overwhelming retaliation. His hand rose, ki gathering in his palm with lethal intensity, and he felt his power spike towards Super Saiyan as his body prepared for combat. The ring on his finger grew hot, not painfully but insistently, and a voice spoke directly into his mind, the same mechanized tone that had first addressed him in the wasteland, but now carrying undertones of something that might have been urgency. "Stand down. You are in no danger. This is standard protocol for all new recruits." "I didn't agree to be recruited," Vegeta snarled, his aura intensifying until the nearest beings, creatures with various alien physiologies, all wearing the same emerald and black uniform, took involuntary steps backward. "And I certainly didn't give permission to be transported while I was training. Return me to Earth." Now, a being stepped forward from the formation, massive and clearly designed for physical combat, with skin that looked like hewn rock and a build that suggested he could shoulder mountains. His expression, to the extent that his granite features allowed expression, registered something between respect and resignation, as if he participated in this particular confrontation many times before and knew exactly how it would unfold. "Easy, Plizzer," the being rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "Nobody's looking for a fight here. The ring brought you to OA, the headquarters of the Green Lantern Corps. It's what happens when someone puts on a ring for the first time. Automatic recall to base for orientation and oath-taking." "I already spoke your oath," Vegeta said, not lowering his hand despite the creature's apparent lack of aggression. "Last night, when this ring chose me. I'm not interested in ceremonies or orientations. I have training to complete." The rock creature's expression shifted slightly, surprise perhaps, or concern. You already spoke the oath? Before transport? That's unusual. The ring's supposed to wait until after you reach Oi, after you understand what you're agreeing to. He glanced at the ring on Vegeta's finger, then back at Vegeta's face, his small eyes narrowing. What exactly did the ring tell you when it found you? Vegeta considered lying, considered simply blasting his way out of this situation and dealing with the consequences later. But something in the creature's tone suggested genuine confusion rather than deception, and his analytical mind recognized that understanding this situation fully before acting might serve him better than immediate violence. He lowered his hand fractionally, the ki dissipating though his aura remained flared. It told me I had the strongest will in my sector, that it was a weapon powered by willpower, created by beings called guardians. It offered power, and I accepted. His eyes narrowed. It said nothing about involuntary transportation to whatever planet this is. Oi, the rock creature repeated, then sighed, a sound like boulders shifting. And yeah, the transport thing should have been mentioned. That's a ring malfunction or... He paused, studying Vegeta more carefully. Or your will was strong enough that the ring bonded immediately, before completing standard protocols, which would make you the first being in about 3,000 years to trigger an emergency induction. Emergency induction, Vegeta repeated flatly. Explain. Before the rock creature could respond, the formation parted, and 6 beings floated forward, small, blue-skinned, humanoid in basic structure but clearly ancient in a way that transcended mere age. They moved with the unhurried precision of entities that had existed for millennia and expected the universe to wait for them. Their eyes, solid white and pupilless, fixed on Vegeta with an intensity that made even his considerable pride bristle uncomfortably. One of them spoke, and despite the being's small stature, the voice carried absolute authority. Vegeta of Universe 7. I am Ganthid of the Guardians of the Universe. You stand on Oi, the center of creation, home to the Green Lantern Corps that has maintained order across 3,600 sectors for countless millennia. The ring you wear has designated you as a member of this corps, and you have spoken an oath that binds you to our purpose. Vegeta's aura flared brighter at the word binds, his Saiyan instincts reacting violently to any implication of constraint. I am bound to nothing except my own choices. If this ring thinks, the oath is not a binding in the sense you fear, Ganthid interrupted, his tone suggesting he'd had this conversation before as well, though perhaps not quite in these circumstances. It is an acknowledgement of purpose, a declaration of intent. The ring responded to your will because your determination aligns with the fundamental purpose of the Green Lanterns, to protect, to maintain order, to oppose those who would spread fear and chaos. I protect nothing except what I choose to protect, Vegeta said coldly. My planet, my family? Beyond that, the universe can burn for all I care. Another guardian floated forward, this one female, her expression harder than Ganthid's. Then why did you speak the oath? No evil shall escape my sight. Those are not empty words. They represent a commitment to justice that extends beyond personal interest. The question caught him off guard, though he'd sooner die than show it. Why had he spoken the oath? The ring had presented the words, and something in him had responded, not to the Guardians or their grand purpose, but to something more fundamental. The promise that he would never again be powerless, never again watch as those with evil intent destroyed everything while he knelt in chains. I spoke your oath because the words served my purpose, he said finally, carefully. Whether they serve yours is irrelevant to me. Ganthid and the female guardian exchanged glances, some wordless communication passing between them. When Ganthid spoke again, his tone had shifted slightly, carrying less authority and more something that might have been curiosity. The ring has provided us with data about you, your physiology, your power level, your emotional spectrum readings. Vegeta, your willpower registers at levels we have rarely encountered in our long history. The ring bonded to you with unusual speed and unusual intensity. This presents complications. Complications, Vegeta repeated, his suspicion deepening. Be specific. The Green Lantern ring is designed to be wielded by beings whose willpower operates within certain parameters. The female guardian explained, her tone clinical. Too little will, and the ring cannot function effectively. But too much, well, that is too intense, too absolute, too inflexible, can cause the ring to behave unpredictably. We have seen such cases before. They rarely end well. Vegeta felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, never fear, but the recognition of familiar patterns. You're saying I'm too strong for your weapon? That you made a mistake in allowing it to choose me? We are saying, Ganthet corrected gently, that you may require specialized training. Monitoring. The ring has bonded to you now, and severing that bond would be extremely difficult without your cooperation. But we need to ensure that the power you've been granted does not corrupt you, or that I don't corrupt it, Vegeta finished, understanding dawning. You fear me. All of you. He looked around at the assembled lanterns, seeing it now in their stances, in the way they maintained their distance despite their superior numbers. You gave me power and immediately regretted it. The silence that followed confirmed his assessment more thoroughly than any words could have. Vegeta laughed, a short, bitter sound that echoed across the crystalline courtyard. Ironic. You create a weapon powered by willpower, then fear when someone with actual will claims it. What did you expect? That only beings who would meekly follow your orders would be chosen. We expected, the female guardian said sharply, that the ring would choose beings capable of balancing willpower with wisdom, strength with restraint. Your emotional readings suggest. I don't care what they suggest. Vegeta's voice dropped to something dangerous, and the assembled lanterns tensed as his power spiked again. Let me make something very clear. I did not ask for this ring. It came to me, claimed I was worthy, and offered power. I accepted because I refused to reject any advantage that might make me stronger. But I will not be lectured about restraint by beings who hide on their perfect planet while others fight their battles. I will not submit to monitoring like some unstable experiment, and I will not pretend to care about your 3,600 sectors when I barely care about my own solar system. He raised his hand, the ring blazing with emerald light that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. So decide now, am I a member of your core, free to use this power as I see fit, or am I a problem you intend to eliminate? Because I promise you, Guardians, attempting the latter will cost you more than you're prepared to pay. The threat hung in the air, and Vegeta felt the assembled lanterns' power levels shift as they prepared for potential combat. Part of him, the part that had survived by never backing down, never showing weakness, wanted them to try. Wanted to test his new power against hundreds of wielders, to see if his will truly was strongest. But Ganthet raised a hand, and the tension deflated slightly. Violence serves no one's purpose here, he said, his tone still measured but carrying undertones of something that might have been respect. Vegeta, you are correct that the ring chose you, and we cannot undo that choice easily. You are also correct that we fear the potential consequences of that choice. But consider this, if your will is truly as absolute as the ring suggests, then you are strong enough to accept training without viewing it as submission. Strong enough to learn from those who have wielded this power for millennia without feeling diminished. Unless, the pause was deliberate, calculated. Vegeta recognized the manipulation even as he responded to it. Unless what? Unless your will is actually fragile, Ganthet finished quietly. Hidden behind pride and aggression because acknowledging limitation feels like destruction. We do not see weakness in you, Prince Vegeta. But we see someone who has built his identity entirely around strength, which means any suggestion that you might need guidance feels like an attack on your existence itself. The words struck deeper than any physical blow could have, because they carried uncomfortable truth. Vegeta stood silent, rage and recognition warring in his chest, while the Guardians and assembled lanterns waited for his response. Finally, carefully, he spoke. What is it you want from me? Participation, Ganthet said simply. Attend the orientation briefing. Accept one training mission under supervision. Demonstrate that you can work within the core structure when necessary, even if you choose to operate independently afterward. Prove to us, and perhaps to yourself, that accepting this power doesn't require abandoning everything you believe about strength and self-reliance. Vegeta wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed to reject this compromise, to blast his way off this planet and return to Earth with the ring, using its power as he saw fit regardless of what these Guardians approved. But beneath the instinct was calculation, the tactical awareness that had kept him alive through decades of impossible battles. He was on an alien planet, surrounded by hundreds of warriors wielding the same power he'd only begun to explore, confronting beings who had created this technology and presumably understood its capabilities far better than he did. Fighting his way out was possible. He believed absolutely in his ability to overcome any obstacle through sheer determination, but it would reveal the full extent of his capabilities to potential enemies, burn bridges that might prove useful later, and waste energy on conflict that served no purpose except satisfying his pride. And beneath even the calculation was something he'd never admit aloud: curiosity. These guardians had existed for millennia, had overseen thousands of warriors wielding power similar to his own. What had they learned? What techniques existed that he hadn't imagined? What could a Saiyan warrior accomplish if he combined his battle instinct with their accumulated knowledge? One training mission, he said finally, the words tasting like compromise but calculating like strategy. Under supervision, as you say. But understand this, I will complete it my way, using my judgment. If your supervision attempts to constrain me unnecessarily, if you try to control rather than observe, the agreement is void. Ganthet inclined his head slightly. Acceptable. We do not seek to control you, Vegeta. We seek to understand you, and to ensure you understand the responsibility you've accepted. The orientation will begin immediately. The Guardians floated backward, returning to their formation, and the massive rock creature approached Vegeta again, his expression somewhere between sympathetic and amused. Well, that went better than expected, he rumbled. Usually when someone threatens the Guardians, they get their ring privileges suspended pending psychological evaluation. You must have impressed them, or they recognize that suspension wouldn't be possible without destroying me, Vegeta countered, though some of the edge had left his voice. Who are you, Kilowog? Senior Lantern, drill instructor, and apparently you're assigned handler for this orientation since I'm the only one here who doesn't look ready to bolt if you sneeze aggressively. The being gestured toward a massive structure that rose from the courtyard like a monument to geometry given physical form. Come on. Let's get you briefed on what you've actually signed up for. The interior of the central power battery, for that was what Kilowog called the massive structure, was simultaneously austere and overwhelming. The walls seemed to be constructed from the same crystalline material as the courtyard, but here the light pulsed with visible energy, as if the building itself was alive with power barely contained. Vegeta could feel it resonating with his ring, a connection that suggested this place was the source from which all the rings drew their energy. Dozens of lanterns filled the space, many of them clearly in the middle of training exercises or mission briefings. They all stopped what they were doing when Vegeta entered, their attention fixing on him with that same mixture of wariness and curiosity he'd seen outside. Word had spread quickly, apparently. Ignore them, Kilowog advised, his massive form clearing a path through the crowd with simple physical presence. You're the talk of Oe right now. First forced induction in 3 millennia, highest initial willpower reading in recorded history, and you threatened the Guardians within 5 minutes of arrival. That's gonna make you either a legend or a cautionary tale, depending on how this plays out. I care nothing for their opinions, Vegeta said, though he noted the faces around him with tactical precision. Potential allies, potential enemies, potential measures of his own capability. A warrior's habit, cataloging threats even in supposedly safe spaces. Kilowog led him to a circular platform surrounded by holographic displays showing star maps, sector designations, and streams of data in languages Vegeta didn't recognize. Another lantern stood there waiting. Human, Vegeta realized with some surprise, with brown skin and an expression of controlled military discipline that suggested command experience. John Stewart, the human, introduced himself, extending a hand in the Earth custom. Former Marine, current Green Lantern, and one of the senior officers who'll be overseeing your orientation. I understand you're from Earth? Vegeta stared at the extended hand without taking it. I live on Earth. I was not born there. Something occurred to him, pieces clicking together with uncomfortable implications. This core already has Earth representation. Multiple humans, based on what I observed outside. Why would the ring seek another warrior from that planet? John lowered his hand without apparent offense. Good question. Usually rings distribute themselves across sectors to maximize coverage. Having 4 lanterns from one planet, you, me, Hal Jordan, and Guy Gardner, is statistically unlikely unless there's something specific about Earth or its inhabitants that produces strong-willed individuals. His expression grew more serious. Or unless the threats facing that particular planet require additional protection. The implications settled in Vegeta's mind like stones. Beerus. The gods of destruction. Whatever forces might still emerge from the remnants of Frisia's empire or beyond, the ring hadn't chosen him randomly. It had assessed threats and determined that Earth's sector required someone with his specific capabilities, which meant the ring's creators knew, or suspected, exactly what kind of dangers existed in Universe 7. These threats you're preparing for, Vegeta said slowly, carefully. You have data on them? Information about what exists in my universe. John gestured to the holographic displays, and the star map zoomed into a region that Vegeta recognized as his home galaxy. Red markers appeared throughout the map, each one presumably indicating a crisis point or active threat. The Guardians have been monitoring your sector for millennia, like all the others. Recently, the threat assessment level has been climbing. Energy signatures that don't match any known civilizations. Disturbances in space-time that suggest beings operating at power levels that would make them Omega-class threats by our classification. He highlighted several specific points, and Vegeta's expression grew cold as he recognized locations: the ruins of planet Vegeta, the coordinates where Cell's self-destruction had occurred, the sector where Beerus had fought Goku. Your ring found you because the Guardians determined that standard lantern capabilities might not be sufficient for what's emerging in that region. They needed someone local, someone who already operated at those power levels and could integrate ring capability with native abilities. They needed a weapon, Vegeta translated. Not a guardian of justice. A fighter powerful enough to handle threats that would overwhelm normal lanterns. Yes, John admitted bluntly. Though that doesn't mean you're just a weapon to be pointed at problems. The Corps believes in the beings it recruits. We think you have the potential to be something more than just raw power. I have no interest in being something more, Vegeta said flatly. If this ring helps me protect what I choose to protect, and makes me stronger in the process, that's sufficient. I don't need philosophy or higher purpose. Kilowog snorted, a sound like grinding gravel. Yeah, that's what they all say at first. Then you spend a few months in the Corps, face down a few universe-ending threats, work alongside beings you'd never have met otherwise. He shrugged massive shoulders. Changes your perspective, whether you want it to or not. Before Vegeta could respond, likely with something cutting about his perspective being perfectly fine as it was, alarms blared throughout the chamber. The holographic displays flashed red, and multiple lanterns immediately powered up, their rings blazing as they prepared for rapid deployment. John's expression shifted to combat focus, his ring displaying information that made his jaw tighten. We've got a situation. Sector 2814. That's your home sector, Vegeta. Multiple distress calls from a populated system under attack. Reports of... He paused, reading more carefully. Reports of a fleet using Thanagarian war technology combined with unknown power sources. Casualties already in the thousands and climbing. Then deploy, Vegeta said impatiently. Why are you still standing here? Because we're not going alone, Kilowog rumbled, his expression grim. This is your orientation mission. You're coming with us, and you're going to see exactly what the Green Lantern Corps does, and why we do it the way we do. Vegeta felt his pride bristle at the implication that he needed to be shown anything, but tactical awareness overrode ego. A real combat situation would let him test the ring's capabilities under actual conditions, observe how these lanterns fought, and measure himself against whatever threats they considered serious enough to warrant multi-lantern response. Fine, he said shortly. But I'm not following your tactics if they're inefficient. Wouldn't expect anything else, Puzzer, Kilowog said, though his tone suggested this was going to be an interesting mission. Just try not to get any civilians killed while you're proving how superior Saiyan combat methods are. The formation assembled rapidly. Kilowog, John, 3 other lanterns Vegeta hadn't been introduced to, and himself. They stood in a circle on the platform, and John explained quickly, ring-powered flight across interstellar distances. Think of your destination clearly, will yourself there, and the ring handles the physics. We'll be traveling together, so focus on staying with the formation. Vegeta absorbed the instructions without comment, feeling the ring respond to his attention. When the formation launched, bursting upward through the ceiling as if the solid material wasn't there at all, he followed on pure instinct, his will demanding that reality bend to accommodate his movement. Space enveloped him, but not the cold vacuum he'd experienced countless times before. The ring created a protective field automatically, maintaining pressure and temperature while allowing him to breathe normally. More than that, it provided sensory information, trajectories, distances, energy signatures, directly into his consciousness, as if his awareness had expanded to encompass the space around him. The sensation was intoxicating. With Ki, he had always been limited to his physical senses, reading power levels through carefully trained perception. The ring simply knew things, fed him data that would have required years of calculation to derive manually. It was like gaining a new sense, one that operated on scales both cosmic and infinitesimal. They traveled faster than Vegeta had ever moved under his own power, space blurring around them as the rings translated their will into velocity that defied conventional physics. Within minutes they had crossed distances that should have taken days even at his top speed. When they dropped out of ring flight, Vegeta found himself staring at a system in chaos. A planet burned below, not metaphorically, but with actual fires visible from orbit as cities were reduced to slag by precise orbital bombardment. The attacking fleet was massive, easily 100 ships, each one bristling with weapons that fired beams of coherent energy toward the planet's surface. And defending against this assault was a single, damaged space station and perhaps a dozen small fighters, hopelessly outmatched, buying time for evacuation ships that fled the system in a steady stream. Standard Lantern Protocol, John said, his voice coming through some kind of ring-to-ring communication. Kilowog and I established defensive barriers to protect the evacuation routes. The others engaged the fleet, targeting weapons systems to disable rather than destroy where possible. Vegeta, he didn't wait for assignment. His ring blazed to life, responding to battle instinct that had been honed over decades, and Vegeta created a construct that dwarfed anything he'd attempted during his practice sessions. A massive Saiyan warrior, easily the size of the attacking capital ships, wreathed in emerald energy and radiating fury that was entirely his own. The construct moved with his will, faster than the fleet could react, and smashed directly through the nearest capital ship's hull. The vessel didn't explode. The construct wasn't designed to detonate, only to disable. But it split cleanly in half, its weapons arrays going dark as power systems failed. Vegeta didn't pause. More constructs erupted into existence around him, an army of emerald warriors, each one attacking a different ship with precision calculated to destroy weapons without triggering critical systems that would kill the crews. It was brutally efficient, the kind of assault that would have taken a traditional military force hours to coordinate, executed in seconds through sheer will made manifest. Stand down. John's voice came sharp through the communication link. Vegeta, you're exceeding force parameters. Their weapons are disabled, Vegeta interrupted coldly, watching his constructs tear through another wave of ships. They can no longer attack the planet. That was the objective, was it not? To stop the bombardment? The objective is to stop the bombardment without triggering a diplomatic incident, John countered, and Vegeta could see him establishing barriers around the evacuation ships even as he spoke. We don't know who's commanding that fleet, or why they're attacking. There might be political complications. I don't care about your politics, Vegeta said, and meant it. The fleet was an immediate threat to a populated planet. Neutralizing that threat was simple mathematics. Remove their capability to harm, and the crisis. The civilians are no longer in danger. That's what matters. But even as he spoke, Vegeta noticed something strange. The fleet wasn't retreating or surrendering despite having their weapons systematically dismantled. Instead, the ships were changing formation, moving with coordinated precision that suggested military discipline and a willingness to continue despite obvious disadvantage. Then the lead capital ship's hull opened, and figures emerged into the vacuum. Dozens of them, humanoid but clearly not human, each one surrounded by energy fields that suggested personal force field technology. They moved toward the planet with clear intent, and Vegeta realized with cold certainty that the bombardment had been a distraction. These warriors, whatever they were, had always been the real threat. Kilowog's voice rumbled through the comm link, carrying grudging respect. Okay, so the puzzers got good combat instincts. They were using the fleet as cover for ground assault. John, stay on evacuation duty. Everyone else, we intercept those troops before they reach the surface. The lanterns moved to engage, but Vegeta was already there, his ring propelling him toward the descending warriors faster than thought. His first construct was simple and brutal, a giant hammer that he swung through their formation with enough force to send a dozen of them spinning into space. But these warriors were trained, equipped, and clearly experienced with superhuman opponents. They recovered quickly, energy weapons appearing in their hands, firing coordinated volleys that would have overwhelmed most targets through sheer volume. Vegeta created shields on instinct, emerald barriers deflecting the energy blasts while his tactical mind processed their capabilities. Strong, well-coordinated, using technology that combined energy manipulation with physical enhancement. Not a serious threat to him personally, but certainly dangerous enough to devastate the planet below if they reached the surface. He needed to end this quickly. Without conscious thought, Vegeta powered up to Super Saiyan, golden aura mixing with emerald light in a way that made his ring flare with sudden, intense heat. The power surge was immediate and overwhelming, the ring responding to his transformation by amplifying its own output, creating a feedback loop where his ki fueled his will, which fueled the ring, which fueled his ki. The construct hammer in his hand grew, doubled in size, became something more weapon than tool. He swung it through the warrior formation again, and this time the impact wasn't just force, it was devastating, sending bodies tumbling through space unconscious or worse. Vegeta, your power output is spiking into dangerous ranges. John's voice came urgently through the calm. The ring has limits. If you push too hard, it could. The warning cut off as Vegeta's ring pulsed, hot enough now to feel like a brand against his finger. But he didn't pull back, didn't reduce his power. Instead, he pushed harder, willing the ring to match his determination, to prove that its capabilities were only as limited as the will that wielded it. More constructs erupted into existence. Saiyan warriors, each one wreathed in Super Saiyan gold and emerald green, each one fighting with his technique and his fury. They swarmed the attacking force, and within minutes the battle was over, the warriors disabled, the fleet in disarray, the planet safe. Vegeta floated in space, surrounded by his army of constructs, breathing hard despite the ring's life support systems. His power level had spiked higher than intended, and he could feel the ring's energy system straining to keep up with his demands. But it had kept up. The ring had matched his will, amplified his strength, proven itself worthy of a Saiyan warrior. The other lanterns approached cautiously, and Vegeta dismissed his constructs with a thought, allowing himself to power down from Super Saiyan. The transformation released, golden aura fading, but the ring continued to pulse with residual energy, as if it had absorbed something from that fusion of ki and willpower, as if it had changed in some fundamental way. Kilowog was the first to speak, his rocky features arranged in an expression that might have been respect or concern. That was impressive. And completely against protocol. And probably the most efficient assault I've seen in 200 years of service. You're gonna give the Guardians nightmares, Puzzer. Good, Vegeta said simply. Perhaps they'll remember that the ring chose correctly. But even as he spoke, he noticed John examining his own ring, frowning at readings that apparently concerned him. When Vegeta caught his eye, the human lantern's expression was serious. We need to get back to Oe, John said quietly. Your ring's power output during that battle exceeded anything in core records, and the way it responded to your transformation, the feedback loop between your ki and the ring's energy. He paused. Vegeta, I think you might have just shown us why the Guardians are afraid, because if you can do that, integrate native abilities with ring power to create something new, then you're not just the strongest lantern in the core. What am I then? Vegeta asked, curious despite himself. Something that's never existed before, John said. And something the Guardians are going to have to figure out how to handle before it becomes a problem none of us can solve. In orbit around the saved planet, surrounded by disabled ships and unconscious warriors, Vegeta looked at the ring on his finger and smiled. The Guardians feared his power. The core didn't know how to classify him. And he had just demonstrated capabilities that apparently defied their millennia of accumulated knowledge. It was, he decided, an excellent beginning. The journey back to Oe was silent, but Vegeta could feel the other Lantern's eyes on him, feel their uncertainty and their grudging respect. He had proven himself in combat, shown them efficiency they couldn't match through their adherence to protocol and restraint. But beneath his satisfaction, a small voice whispered warning. The ring had grown hot during battle, had strained under the combined pressure of his ki and his will. The Guardians had said too much willpower could make the ring behave unpredictably. And he had just pushed it far beyond what they considered safe operational parameters. The question was whether that represented a limitation to overcome, or a warning he should have heeded. Vegeta looked at his reflection in the ring's surface, seeing his own eyes staring back wreathed in emerald light, and decided that limitations were simply challenges waiting to be surpassed. The ring had chosen him. It would learn to match his strength, or he would force it to. Either way, he would not be constrained by fear of power. Not his own, and certainly not theirs. The return to Earth came with neither fanfare nor ceremony, just the familiar disorientation of the ring's transportation followed by the jarring solidity of Capsule Corp's grounds beneath his feet. Vegeta materialized in the gardens, scattering a flock of birds that had been pecking at Bulma's meticulously maintained flower beds, their startled cries fading into the morning air as he stood motionless, processing the past 48 hours. The Guardians. The mission that had revealed capabilities even he hadn't anticipated. The memory of that feedback loop, ki and willpower spiraling together into something greater than either alone, sat in his chest like a coal that refused to cool, still radiating potential heat. The ring pulsed against his finger, a steady rhythm now, though during the battle it had burned hot enough to blister ordinary flesh. His Saiyan physiology had handled the temperature without complaint, but the sensation had been significant. A warning, perhaps, or an invitation. The distinction seemed increasingly irrelevant. Capsule Corp's main building rose before him, its familiar architecture a stark contrast to Oi's crystalline perfection. Home, if he allowed himself to use that word, though the concept still felt foreign even after years of residence, as if some part of him remained convinced that home was a burning planet he'd never actually known, reconstructed entirely from his father's bitter stories and his own imagination's embellishments. He could sense Bulma inside, her key signature a warm constant that his awareness had learned to track unconsciously over the years. Trunks was there too, young and bright, probably pestering his mother about some new invention or begging for training time. The normalcy of it struck him oddly, making the past 2 days feel even more surreal in contrast. Vegeta made his way inside, moving through the corridors with the silence that came naturally to someone who'd spent formative years surviving in hostile territory. The kitchen was empty, breakfast dishes still scattered across the counter in organized chaos that was distinctly Bulma's style. Everything appeared messy but was actually positioned with perfect efficiency for her work patterns. He found her in the lab, as expected, surrounded by holographic displays showing energy readings and molecular structures. She didn't turn when he entered, but her shoulders shifted slightly, acknowledging his presence in that way she had of being aware of him even when her attention was focused elsewhere. So, she said, her voice carefully neutral in that way that meant she was actually deeply concerned but had decided not to lead with confrontation. The mysterious alien ring decided to return you. Should I be grateful, or is this just a temporary loan? Vegeta moved to stand beside her, examining the displays without really processing their content. It was an orientation. The ring's creators wanted to ensure I understood what I'd accepted. And do you? Now she did turn, her blue eyes searching his face with that penetrating gaze that had always seen too much, found truths he'd buried beneath layers of pride and carefully maintained emotional distance. Understand, I mean? He considered the question with more honesty than he would have granted anyone else. I understand that they fear me. That they gave me power and immediately questioned whether that decision would destroy them. That their entire organization is built on principles I find fundamentally weak. Cooperation, restraint, submission to collective authority. He raised his hand, watching the ring catch the lab's artificial light. And I understand that despite all of that, this weapon is real. The power it offers is real, and I would be a fool to reject it simply because its creators lack the conviction to wield it properly themselves. Bulma's expression softened slightly, worry lines easing around her eyes. You were gone for 2 days. I couldn't track you, couldn't sense your ki once you left Earth's atmosphere. Do you have any idea what that was like? Sitting here, wondering if you'd been captured or killed or... She stopped, jaw tightening. And then you just reappear in the garden like nothing happened. The guilt surprised him, not its existence, but its intensity. Somewhere along the line, without quite meaning to, he'd become someone who cared about causing her distress. The realization was simultaneously comforting and deeply uncomfortable. The transportation happened without warning, he said, which wasn't quite an apology but was as close as he typically came. And in the future I'll inform you. If the ring decides to abduct me again, inform me, Bulma repeated, something like amusement flickering across her features despite her obvious residual worry. Right. Because you're so good at communication. But she stepped closer, reaching out to take his hand, the one with the ring, and examined it with a scientist's focused intensity. The energy signature has changed since you left. It's more stable in some ways, but there are these fluctuations. Like the ring is still adapting to you, or you to it. Vegeta watched her fingers trace the metal, her touch careful and analytical, and felt the ring respond, not with heat this time, but with a subtle pulse of energy that seemed almost curious, as if it was assessing Bulma, determining her significance in his hierarchy of concerns. It responds to will, he explained, the words coming easier with her than they had on Oe, where everything felt like potential weakness to be exploited by watching enemies, but not just determination in general. Specifically to battle spirit, to the refusal to accept defeat or limitation. During the mission, he paused, remembering, there was a moment when I transformed to Super Saiyan while using the ring. The two power sources combined in a way that shouldn't have been possible. My ki fueled my will, which fueled the ring, which amplified my ki. A feedback loop that the other lanterns said exceeded anything in their records. Bulma's eyes widened slightly. Her scientific interest immediately peaked despite the underlying concern. A resonance cascade. Two energy systems reinforcing each other exponentially rather than just additively. She pulled up a new holographic display, fingers flying across the interface. That would explain these readings. The ring isn't just drawing power from some external source anymore. It's learned to tap into your ki directly, use it as additional fuel. Vegeta, that's either brilliant or catastrophically dangerous. Both, he said simply, because that felt accurate. The Guardians made it clear they consider my use of the ring anomalous. Too much willpower, they claimed. As if such a thing were possible. For most people, probably not. Bulma saved her data and turned to face him fully, her expression settling into something serious. But you're not most people. You're someone who's built his entire identity around refusing to accept limits, pushing past every boundary, breaking himself apart, and reforming stronger out of pure stubborn determination. If this ring really does respond to willpower. She touched the metal again, her finger tracing the green band. Then it's feeding off the most concentrated source of unyielding will in probably several galaxies. No wonder they're scared. The words should have felt like validation, like recognition of his superiority. Instead, they settled uncomfortably, echoing Ganthet's observation about will so absolute it became fragile, hidden behind aggression because acknowledging limitation felt like destruction. Before he could respond, Trunks' key signature flared nearby. The boy was training in the gravity chamber, pushing himself with the kind of determined effort that reminded Vegeta painfully of himself at that age. The thought of his son brought with it the usual complex tangle of emotions, pride in the boy's strength, discomfort with his own role as father, the persistent fear that he was somehow failing at this task in ways he couldn't quite articulate. He's been asking about you, Bulma said, following his awareness. Wanted to know where you went, why you left without saying goodbye. I told him you had business. But Vegeta, he's not a baby anymore. He understands more than you think. I know what he understands, Vegeta said, more sharply than intended. He understands that his father is always training, always pushing, always chasing strength. He understands that I'm not. The words caught, refusing to form. Not like Kakarot. Not warm, not approachable, not the kind of father who plays games and tells stories and makes his son feel like the center of his universe. Bulma's hand found his shoulder, squeezing gently. He also understands that you love him, even if you're terrible at showing it, and that you're trying, in your own stubborn, emotionally constipated way, to be better than what you were raised to be. She smiled, though it carried edges of sadness. Give yourself some credit, Vegeta. You didn't abandon him. You came back. The distinction felt insufficient but also somehow significant. He had come back. The ring could have taken him anywhere, offered escape from responsibilities and expectations, given him an entire universe of battles to fight, but he negotiated for return, insisted on maintaining connection to Earth despite the Guardians' obvious preference that he remain under their observation. I should. He gestured vaguely toward the gravity chamber, the words feeling clumsy. He'll want to know about the ring. And Kakarot will arrive soon. We have a scheduled match. Bulma's expression shifted, concern returning. Are you sure that's a good idea? You just got back, you're clearly still processing whatever happened on that planet, and now you want to immediately throw yourself into combat with Goku? It's exactly what I need, Vegeta countered, and felt the truth of it resonate through his chest. Combat was clarity, was purpose, was the one arena where everything made sense and strength could be measured objectively. Besides, I need to test the ring's capabilities against a serious opponent. The mission on Oi was instructive but limited. Those warriors were skilled but not strong enough to truly push my limits. And Goku is, Bulma finished, not quite a question. She sighed, recognizing defeat in that way she had of knowing when argument would be futile. Fine, but I'm monitoring from here, and if those energy readings start going into dangerous ranges, I'm calling it off. I don't care if you're in the middle of proving some point about Saiyan pride. He wanted to argue, to insist that she had no authority to call anything off, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth, uncomfortable, undeniable, was that her concern mattered. That somewhere in the years of cohabitation and partnership and the slow, painful process of learning to be something other than a weapon, he'd granted her that authority by simple virtue of caring whether she worried. Understood, he said instead, and saw the flash of surprise cross her features before she covered it with a smile. The wasteland stretched empty and vast under the afternoon sun, heat shimmer rising from cracked earth in waves that distorted the horizon. Vegeta stood at the center of their usual training ground, a crater-pocked expanse where the evidence of their previous battles lay scattered like archaeological remains of their escalating rivalry. The ring pulsed against his finger, steady and patient, waiting for his will to shape it into purpose. He'd been experimenting while he waited for Kakarot to arrive, creating constructs with increasing complexity. First simple weapons, then armor, then full replicas of enemies he'd faced. The ring's response time was improving, learning his patterns, adapting to the way his mind moved from intent to action with minimal conscious thought. A perfect cell construct stood before him now, every detail exact. The spotted carapace, the android's cold eyes, the wings folded against his back. Vegeta had fought the real version to exhaustion, had watched helplessly as Gohan surpassed them all to deliver the final blow. The memory still burned, not with the heat of fresh rage but with the steady ache of old humiliation. The construct moved according to his will, mimicking Cell's fighting stance, and Vegeta engaged it with precise strikes, testing response time and durability. The construct blocked, countered, adapted, but it was ultimately just a puppet, moving as he unconsciously directed it. There was no real challenge here, no genuine threat to sharpen himself against. He dismissed it with a thought just as Goku's key signature flared into his awareness, approaching at high speed. The other Saiyan landed a dozen yards away, his characteristic grin already in place, though Vegeta noticed the way Goku's eyes immediately went to the ring, curious, assessing, carrying an undercurrent of concern that his carefree demeanor couldn't quite conceal. So that's the ring Bulma told me about, Goku said, walking closer with his hands shoved casually in his GI pockets. Looks pretty cool. She said it makes you even stronger? It amplifies willpower, Vegeta corrected, not bothering with pleasantries. They'd long since moved past the need for verbal sparring before physical confrontation. Their ritual was too well established for such pretense. Translates determination directly into reality. Creates constructs from pure energy based on what I imagine. Goku's expression grew thoughtful, his battle instincts clearly working through implications. So if you're really determined to win, the ring makes you stronger? That sounds kind of dangerous, actually. What happens if you get too determined? The question echoed the Guardian's warnings, spoken with Goku's typical directness rather than their careful political phrasing. Vegeta felt irritation spike, then forced it down. Kakarot wasn't questioning his capability, just expressing concern in that annoyingly sincere way he had. Then I'd become unstoppable, Vegeta said simply. Which is the entire point. Now stop wasting time with analysis. We're here to fight, not philosophize. Something flickered in Goku's eyes, not quite doubt, but a shadow of it. A moment of hesitation that Vegeta recognized from other times when the low-class warrior had sensed something wrong but couldn't quite articulate what. But then the grin returned, and Goku dropped into his ready stance. Alright, But don't blame me if I knock that fancy ring right off your finger. They moved simultaneously, either requiring countdown or signal. Just a mutual understanding that the fight had begun. Vegeta met Goku's opening combination with precise blocks, reading the patterns he'd memorized through countless exchanges, and countered with a knee strike that Goku barely twisted away from. The dance was familiar, their bodies knowing the rhythm even as their minds stayed focused on the present moment. But this time, Vegeta reached for the ring's power, willing it to enhance his movements, and felt emerald energy surge through his limbs. His next strike came faster, hit harder, and Goku's eyes widened as the blow connected with his guard with enough force to slide him back several feet. The other Saiyan recovered quickly, powering up to Super Saiyan, and Vegeta matched him, golden aura erupting around him just as the ring's green light intensified. This was what he'd wanted to test. The combination, the fusion of ki and willpower into something greater than either alone. His constructs began forming instinctively, not weapons this time, but armor that flowed across his body like living metal, adapting to Goku's attacks in real time, reinforcing points of impact and creating counterweights that enhanced his own strikes. Goku's expression shifted from playful to serious, recognizing that this wasn't just their typical sparring match. Vegeta, that ring, it feels weird. Like it's feeding off something. It's feeding off my battle spirit, Vegeta said, and delivered a combination that forced Goku back, each strike enhanced by constructs that formed and dissolved in microseconds, an extra edge on his fist, a platform beneath his foot for additional leverage, a shield that caught Goku's counter and redirected it. This is what true power looks like, Kakarot, will made manifest, determination that refuses to be contained by physical limits. They broke apart, both breathing harder now, and Vegeta could feel it happening, the feedback loop beginning, ki and ring energy starting to spiral together. It felt good, felt right, like finally accessing strength that had always been there waiting for him to claim it. Goku powered up to Super Saiyan Blue, his aura shifting to that distinctive azure, and his expression grew grave. I don't think this is a good idea, Vegeta. Something about that ring. Don't, Vegeta interrupted, his own transformation following, matching blue for blue. Don't you dare hold back because you're worried. Fight me seriously, or don't fight me at all. For a moment, Goku looked like he might argue, might power down, and insist they talk about this like reasonable people. Then he sighed, and the familiar determination settled into his features. The look that said he'd decided to trust his rival's judgment, even if he disagreed with it. All right. But if this goes wrong, I'm stopping it. They clashed again, and this time the impact cratered the ground beneath them, sent shockwaves rippling across the wasteland. Vegeta's ring blazed, responding to the intensity of his determination to win, to prove that he could match Kakarot at any level. Constructs formed faster now, more complex, not just armor and weapons but entire tactical scenarios, barriers that redirected Goku's ki blasts, platforms that gave him aerial advantage, even construct clones that attacked from angles Goku didn't expect. The ring was learning, adapting to his combat style, becoming an extension of his battle instinct rather than a separate tool that required conscious activation. And with each exchange, as his determination to overcome Goku intensified, the ring's power grew stronger. Goku was adapting too, his superior combat intuition reading the patterns in Vegeta's construct usage, finding the gaps in coverage. But for the first time in years, Vegeta felt like he was actually winning, like he was imposing his will on this fight rather than constantly playing catch-up to Kakarot's inexplicable ability to pull new transformations and techniques from nowhere. He created a construct of cell mid-exchange, watching Goku's eyes widen in shock, then shattered it into 1,000 cutting shards. Goku dodged most of them, but several scored hits, drawing blood, and Vegeta felt savage satisfaction surge through him. You see it now, don't you? Vegeta called out, his voice carrying over the clash of energies. This is what happens when real willpower meets real power. Not your borrowed techniques, not your divine training, just pure determination made reality. But even as he spoke, even as he pressed his advantage, some part of him registered that the ring was growing hot again. Not uncomfortable yet, not painful, but warm enough to be noticeable even through the rush of combat adrenaline. The feedback loop was intensifying, ki and willpower spiraling faster, and he could feel his power climbing past levels he'd maintained for sustained periods before. Goku fired a Kamehameha, the beam massive and precisely controlled, and Vegeta created a construct, a shield the size of a house, dense enough that the attack splashed against it like water against stone. The construct held, and Vegeta used it as cover to close distance, appearing behind Goku with a combination that should have ended the fight. Should have, except Goku twisted impossibly, his body responding to instinct faster than thought, and caught Vegeta's wrist. For a moment they were locked there, faces inches apart, both breathing hard, both pouring power into the struggle. And in Goku's eyes, Vegeta saw genuine concern, not for himself, but for what Vegeta was becoming in this moment. "Stop," Goku said quietly, urgently. "Vegeta, I can feel it. That ring is changing you. Your ki feels wrong, like it's being twisted into something stronger," Vegeta snarled, and the ring flared so bright it hurt to look at directly. More constructs erupted around them, an army of Saiyan warriors, each one wreathed in Super Saiyan blue, each one attacking Goku with Vegeta's technique and fury. It was too much. Even Goku couldn't fight an entire army of opponents operating at his level, each one coordinated by a single tactical mind. He was forced back, forced onto the defensive, and Vegeta felt triumph roar through his chest. Finally he was proving his superiority, demonstrating that given the right weapon, his will was absolutely unstoppable. The constructs pressed their advantage, and Vegeta stood at the center of his Emerald Army, conducting their assault with thoughts that barely qualified as conscious. This was what he'd always deserved, what he'd earned through decades of suffering and struggle and refusing to break. Power that actually matched his determination, that grew stronger the more intensely he demanded it obey. Then Goku did something unexpected. He powered down completely, dropping out of Super Saiyan Blue, out of any transformation, returning to base form. The Construct Warriors' attacks suddenly had a clear target, undefended and vulnerable, and Vegeta couldn't make them strike. His will, his absolute, unyielding determination, stuttered, fractured by the image of Kakarot standing defenseless while an army of Emerald Saiyans bore down on him. Because Goku wasn't defending himself, wasn't fighting back, was just standing there with an expression that somehow managed to be both sad and trusting. "You won't do it," Goku said simply, quietly, his voice somehow carrying across the battlefield despite the roar of energy. "I know you, Vegeta. You're not someone who strikes down an unarmed opponent. That's not who you are anymore." The constructs froze, hovering in place, awaiting orders that Vegeta couldn't give. His ring blazed, responding to the sudden conflict in his will. The determination to win warring with the determination not to become the kind of warrior who murdered defenseless enemies. Ganthet's words echoed in his memory, will so absolute it becomes fragile, hidden behind pride because acknowledging limitation feels like destruction. "Fight back," Vegeta demanded, his voice rough. "Power up, defend yourself, don't just..." "I'm not fighting anymore," Goku interrupted, and took a step forward, directly toward the nearest construct. "Because this isn't about fighting. This is about that ring feeding off your battle spirit until there's nothing left but the need to win. And I won't help it do that to you." The ring pulsed, hot enough now that ordinary flesh would have blistered. Vegeta could feel the feedback loop spiraling, demanding he finish this, prove his superiority, cement his victory. But Goku's words, combined with his inexplicable, infuriating trust, created interference, made his determination complex instead of pure. With effort that felt like tearing something vital inside himself, Vegeta dismissed the constructs. All of them, simultaneously, dissolving into particles of light that faded on the wind. He powered down as well, letting Super Saiyan Blue drain away, and stood facing Goku across the crater-scarred wasteland while the ring slowly cooled against his finger. "You're a fool," he said, but the words lacked heat. "I could have killed you. But you didn't," Goku pointed out, walking closer now, his expression softening. "And that matters, Vegeta. That's what I'm trying to tell you. That ring is powerful, yeah, but it's also dangerous. Not because it makes you stronger, but because it feeds off the part of you that can't ever accept being second best. And if you keep feeding it that way..." He paused, searching for words. "You might become so determined to win that you forget why winning mattered in the first place." The observation cut deeper than any physical blow could have, because it echoed truths Vegeta had been avoiding since the ring first appeared. His identity was built around strength, around the refusal to accept limitation or defeat. The ring had found him because that determination was absolute, unyielding, powerful enough to fuel constructs that exceeded anything the core had seen. But what happened when that determination encountered something it couldn't overcome through force alone? What happened when winning required becoming something he'd spent years trying to move beyond? I won't give up the ring, he said, because that needed to be clear. This power is mine. I earned it by surviving everything that should have destroyed me, by refusing to break when breaking would have been easier. The Guardians fear it, and you're concerned about it. But I will not apologize for being strong enough to wield what others can't handle. Goku's expression shifted, something like understanding crossing his features. I'm not asking you to give it up. I'm asking you to be careful. To remember that strength without control is just destruction. He smiled slightly, that familiar grin that somehow managed to be both infuriating and disarming. You've got people who care about you now, Vegeta. Bulma, Trunks, even the rest of us. We don't want to lose you to that ring because you were too proud to admit it might be dangerous. The words hung between them, heavy with implications and unspoken concern. Vegeta wanted to reject them, to insist that he needed no one's protection or care, that he was perfectly capable of managing his own power without oversight. But the memory of those final moments, standing at the center of his construct army, unable to give the order to strike down a defenseless opponent, suggested that perhaps Goku had a point. Perhaps his will, for all its vaunted strength, had limits that weren't about power but about what he was willing to become in pursuit of victory. Your concern is noted, he said finally stiffly. And unnecessary. But I will monitor the ring's influence. Ensure that it remains a weapon rather than becoming a master. Goku's grin widened. That's all I'm asking. Well, that and maybe we don't spar quite so intensely while you're still figuring out how that thing works. I'd rather not get accidentally killed because you got too determined to win. Despite himself, despite the turbulent emotions still churning through his chest, Vegeta felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. You deserve it for being foolish enough to power down mid-battle. Probably, Goku agreed cheerfully, and extended his hand in that infuriating gesture of camaraderie that Vegeta had never quite learned to accept gracefully. He looked at the offered hand, at Goku's open expression, and felt the ring pulse gently, not with heat this time, but with something that might have been satisfaction, as if the ring recognized that this moment, this choice to restrain rather than strike, represented strength as genuine as any combat victory. Vegeta clasped Goku's hand briefly, the gesture awkward but sincere, then released it and turned away before the moment could become overly sentimental. Tell Bulma I'll be in the gravity chamber. And Kakarot. He paused, the words difficult but necessary. Thank you for the reminder. Behind him, he heard Goku's quiet response. That's what rivals are for. Bulma found him hours later, still in the gravity chamber but not training, just sitting against the wall, staring at the ring while 500 times Earth's gravity pressed down on him with familiar, grounding weight. She slid down beside him without speaking, her presence comfortable in the silence. After a while, she asked, "How did it go?" "I nearly killed him," Vegeta said bluntly. "Not through lack of control, but through too much of it. The ring responded to my determination to win, created constructs powerful enough to overwhelm even Kakarot. And I couldn't stop it because stopping meant admitting limitation, which my will refuses to acknowledge." Bulma processed that, her scientific mind clearly working through implications. "So what stopped you?" He powered down. Stood defenseless. Vegeta laughed, short and bitter. "Forced me to choose between victory and becoming someone who strikes down unarmed opponents. The ring couldn't resolve that conflict. My determination to win versus my determination not to become a monster. So it stalled, and I dismissed the constructs." "Good," Bulma said simply. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of intimacy that still surprised him even after years. "That means the ring can't override who you actually are. It can amplify your will, but it can't change what you fundamentally refuse to accept about yourself." The observation was astute, cutting to the heart of what had happened with more clarity than he managed during his own analysis. His will was absolute, but that absoluteness included refusal to become certain things, to cross certain lines. The ring could make him stronger, could translate his determination into devastating power, but it couldn't force him to violate his own deeply held convictions about what strength meant. "The Guardians were right to fear me," he said quietly. Not because I'm too strong, but because I'm too complex. The ring works best with simple determination: protect the innocent, defeat the enemy, maintain order. My will doesn't work that way. It's layered, contradictory, built on decades of trauma and pride and the slow, painful process of becoming someone other than what I was raised to be. Which makes you perfect for it, Bulma countered. She sat up, turning to face him with that fierce expression she got when arguing a point she believed in completely. The ring didn't choose you despite your complexity. It chose you because of it. Because real willpower isn't simple. It's messy and contradictory and has to balance competing desires. That's what makes it strong, Vegeta. Not the ability to pursue one goal mindlessly, but the ability to hold multiple truths simultaneously and still move forward. He looked at her, seeing the conviction in her eyes, and felt something ease in his chest. You have more faith in me than I deserve. I have exactly the right amount of faith in you, she corrected, then smiled. Which includes faith that you'll keep being stubborn and difficult and impossible, but that you'll also keep trying to be better than you were yesterday. That's all anyone can ask. The ring pulsed warm against his finger, not hot this time, not demanding, but almost approving, as if it recognized that this moment, this conversation, this choice to examine his own limits rather than simply surging past them, represented genuine strength. Vegeta stood, offering Bulma his hand to help her up, and felt the gravity press down with satisfying weight. Tomorrow he would train again, would continue exploring the ring's capabilities and refining his control. Tomorrow he would face whatever challenges emerged from his connection to the core, whatever consequences followed from demonstrating power that exceeded their historical records. But tonight, he would simply exist, a warrior learning to balance absolute will with the wisdom to know when that will needed tempering, a father trying to be better than his own absent example, a partner learning that strength could include vulnerability without becoming weakness. The ring had chosen him because his will was strongest. But perhaps, he thought as he followed Bulma from the gravity chamber, true strength wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about knowing which things you refused to break, even when breaking would be easier, even when the ring offered power enough to shatter anything, even when victory meant becoming someone he'd spent years learning not to be. Outside, the stars were beginning to emerge, and somewhere among them was Oe, with its guardians and its fears and its core of warriors who wielded willpower as weapon. They expected him to fail, to let the ring corrupt him, to prove that absolute determination inevitably led to tyranny. Vegeta looked at the ring, at the way emerald light reflected in Bulma's eyes, and smiled. He would prove them wrong. Not through restraint or submission, but by demonstrating that a will strong enough to refuse breaking was also strong enough to refuse corruption. The battle spirit they feared wasn't a weakness waiting to consume him. It was his greatest strength, refined through everything he'd survived into something that couldn't be contained, but also couldn't be compromised. The ring had chosen correctly after all. The night found Vegeta where nights often did, alone in the wastelands, surrounded by the evidence of his own restlessness carved into stone and earth. The moon hung low and swollen above the horizon, casting long shadows that made the crater-scarred landscape look like the surface of some dead world, and perhaps that was fitting. He'd destroyed enough planets in his youth to recognize the aesthetic of desolation, though back then he'd taken pride in the efficiency of such destruction rather than seeking it out for solitude. The ring pulsed against his finger with a rhythm that had become almost familiar over the past weeks, steady, patient, waiting for his will to give it purpose. He'd been experimenting again, pushing boundaries that the Guardians would likely classify as reckless if they knew, though their knowledge or approval had ceased to concern him the moment he'd returned to Earth. Their fear was their problem, not his constraint. A construct materialized before him, his father, King Vegeta, rendered in emerald light with such precision that every detail was perfect down to the skull lines around his eyes and the way his armor sat heavy, on shoulders that had carried the weight of a dying race. The image stood silent, judging, exactly as Vegeta remembered from fragmented childhood memories that might have been real or might have been constructed from wishful thinking and his own desperate need for paternal approval that never came. He'd created this construct dozens of times now, studying it from different angles, trying to reconcile the man he remembered, or thought he remembered, with the man who must have actually existed. A king who'd bowed to Frisia, who'd sent his son away not out of love but out of some calculation about bloodline preservation, who'd died screaming defiance that changed nothing about the burning planet behind him. You would have hated the ring, Vegeta said quietly to the construct, his voice carrying across the empty wasteland to no one. You spent your whole life believing strength came from Saiyan blood, from royal lineage, from the purity of our warrior race. And here I am, accepting power from aliens who preach cooperation and restraint. He paused, studying the emerald face that wore his father's features. But you're dead, and I'm not. So perhaps my judgment about what makes strength is more reliable than yours ever was. The construct said nothing. It couldn't, being merely light and were given temporary form. But Vegeta found himself imagining the response anyway. Disappointment, probably. Accusations of weakness, of betraying Saiyan pride by accepting gifts from those who would constrain him. The familiar litany of failures that had defined his relationship with a father he barely remembered but whose approval he'd spent decades chasing despite said father being long dead. He dismissed the construct with a thought, watching it dissolve into particles that faded on the night wind, and created something else instead. A perfect sphere of compressed energy, dense enough that the air around it shimmered with heat distortion. Not a weapon, though it could become one instantly if he willed it. Just potential, held in perfect balance, waiting to be shaped by intent. The exercise was meditative in its way, requiring absolute focus to maintain the sphere's stability, while simultaneously keeping his mind empty of specific purpose. Will without direction, determination without goal, a paradox that the ring seemed to accept with increasing ease the more he practiced. As if the weapon itself was learning that his mind operated in contradictions, layered intentions that existed simultaneously without canceling each other out. That was when he felt it, a presence entering his awareness, not through key signature but through some other sense that the ring provided. A distortion in space itself, reality bending to accommodate something arriving that hadn't been there moments before. Vegeta's combat instincts flared immediately, the energy sphere transforming into a blade even as he spun toward the source of the disturbance. Ganthet materialized 10 feet away, the Guardian's small form appearing with the same casual disregard for conventional transportation that characterized all the ring's spatial manipulation. His wide eyes fixed on Vegeta with an intensity that suggested this visit was neither casual nor scheduled, and his expression carried something that might have been concern or might have been calculation. The distinction seemed increasingly irrelevant with beings who'd existed for millennia and probably viewed emotions as tools rather than genuine experiences. Prince Vegeta, the Guardian said, his voice carrying that same quality of absolute authority mixed with something that might have been weariness, as if this conversation was one he'd had before in different contexts with different outcomes that all ended poorly. Forgive the intrusion, but circumstances require we speak, and I judged that coming to you would be more productive than summoning you to OA. Vegeta didn't dismiss the construct blade, though he lowered it slightly, indicating awareness without vulnerability. You judged correctly. Another forced transportation would have tested my patience severely. He studied the Guardian with the same analytical intensity he'd apply to any potential opponent, noting details. The way Ganthet's form floated rather than standing, the subtle glow emanating from his blue skin suggesting energy levels that made power level assessment difficult. The complete absence of fear despite knowing exactly what Vegeta was capable of. What circumstances? I completed your orientation mission successfully. Excessively so, according to the reports I'm certain were filed. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Ganthet's features before being replaced by that careful neutrality. Indeed. Your efficiency was remarkable. Also deeply concerning to several of my fellow Guardians, who noted that you disabled an entire fleet and its ground forces in less than half the time standard protocol would have required, using methods that pushed your ring to operational limits we typically forbid lanterns from approaching. Your protocols are designed for warriors who lack the strength to truly test the ring's capabilities, Vegeta countered, the words sharp but not dismissive. He'd learned that Ganthet, at least, responded better to honest assessment than empty platitudes. I'm not interested in operating within artificial constraints created by beings who fear what their own weapon can accomplish. And that, Ganthet said quietly, is precisely why I'm here. He gestured, and the space between them rippled, reality folding to create a flat surface that might have been a screen or might have been a window into somewhere else entirely. Images appeared, Vegeta during the mission, surrounded by his construct army, ring blazing with light intense enough to cast harsh shadows across the battlefield. Then other images, older, showing different beings, aliens of various physiologies, all wearing Green Lantern rings, all surrounded by emerald constructs that looked increasingly unstable as the sequence progressed. The final image in each sequence was the same, the ring bearer transformed into something that barely resembled their original form, constructs having somehow merged with flesh, green light bleeding from eyes and mouths while the being screamed or raged or simply stood motionless in poses that suggested consciousness had departed, leaving only will made manifest. These, Ganthet explained, his tone carrying weight that transcended mere information delivery, are previous lanterns whose willpower exceeded safe operational parameters. Beings who, like you, possess determination so absolute that the ring couldn't properly regulate their power output. In each case, the result was catastrophic, not just for the bearer, but for everyone around them. Vegeta studied the images with careful attention, his tactical mind cataloging details even as pride bristled at the implicit comparison. "You're showing me failure cases to frighten me into compliance, suggesting that I'll suffer the same fate if I don't restrain myself according to your guidelines." "I'm showing you historical precedent," Ganthet corrected, though without heat, "to help you understand why the Corps has protocols, why the Guardians fear certain applications of ring power, why we design the weapons with built-in limitations despite knowing those limitations would frustrate users who believe themselves beyond constraint." The images shifted, showing the aftermath. Devastated planets, refugee populations, sectors that had taken centuries to recover from whatever the corrupted lanterns had unleashed. In every case, the Guardian continued, the bearer believed they were strong enough to handle unlimited power. That their will was pure enough, focused enough, absolute enough to prevent corruption. And in every case, they were wrong, not because they were weak, but because they fundamentally misunderstood what the ring actually does. The distinction caught Vegeta's attention despite his desire to dismiss this entire conversation as manipulative fear-mongering. "Explain." Ganthet dismissed the images with a gesture, and the space between them returned to simple emptiness. "The ring is not merely a tool that amplifies willpower. It's a symbiotic system that forms a feedback loop with its bearer's determination. The more you will something, the more power the ring provides. The more power it provides, the easier it becomes to will things into existence. This creates an escalating cycle where the boundary between your intent and the ring's capability begins to erode." He paused, letting the words settle, before continuing. "Most lanterns never reach the point where this becomes dangerous because their will has natural limits. Moments of doubt, competing desires, emotional complexity that creates interference in the feedback loop. But beings like you, whose will has been refined through trauma into something approaching absolute." The Guardian's expression grew grave. "You have no natural limits. Which means the ring will continue amplifying your determination until either you impose artificial constraints, or the system becomes unstable." Vegeta processed that, feeling uncomfortable recognition settle in his chest. The feedback loop Ganthet described matched exactly what had happened during his sparring match with Kakarot. The spiraling combination of ki and willpower that had grown stronger with each exchange until he'd been unable to stop it through anything except external intervention. Goku powering down, forcing Vegeta to choose between victory and violating his own convictions about honorable combat. "So what you're actually saying," Vegeta said slowly, working through implications, "is that the ring is designed for beings whose willpower is strong but not absolute. That someone like me, whose entire identity is built on refusing to accept limitation, creates a fundamental incompatibility with the weapon's safety systems." "Yes," Ganthet confirmed simply. "Though I would phrase it differently. The ring recognizes genuine strength of will, which you possess in exceptional measure, but it cannot distinguish between determination that serves constructive purpose and determination that exists purely as refusal to acknowledge constraint. For most bearers, that distinction is irrelevant because their will naturally includes both aspects. For you." He let the sentence trail off, the implication clear. Vegeta felt rage spike, not the hot fury that had defined his younger years, but something colder and more dangerous. The anger that came from being told that his greatest strength was actually a flaw to be managed. "You're suggesting my will is too pure, that having determination without the weakness of doubt or competing desires makes me dangerous rather than strong." "I'm suggesting," Ganthet said carefully, "that will without wisdom is simply stubbornness elevated to cosmic scale, and that the ring, in your hands, amplifies both your strength and your blindness in equal measure." The Guardian floated closer, his expression carrying something that looked almost like sympathy. Prince Vegeta, I don't doubt your capability. Your combat efficiency is remarkable, your tactical acumen exceptional, your raw power among the highest we've recorded. But power without the wisdom to know when not to use it is simply destruction waiting for excuse to manifest. The words echoed observations that Bulma had made, that Kakarot had implied, that Vegeta himself had reluctantly acknowledged during moments of uncomfortable self-reflection. His will was absolute, but that absoluteness came from trauma, from decades of surviving through sheer refusal to break, from building his entire identity around the concept that accepting limitation equaled death. Which meant Ganthet was right. The ring didn't just amplify his strength, it amplified every defensive mechanism he'd constructed to survive impossible circumstances. And those mechanisms, while useful for endurance, were fundamentally incompatible with the kind of restraint required to wield unlimited power responsibly. What do you want from me? The question emerged more quietly than intended, carrying weight that transcended mere information seeking. You didn't come here just to warn me about historical failures or explain feedback loops. There's a specific purpose to this conversation. Ganthet's expression shifted, something like respect crossing his features before being replaced by that careful neutrality again. I want you to understand what you're carrying, not just the ring's capabilities, but its limitations, and by extension your own. The weapon will give you everything you demand of it, will amplify your determination to heights that would make you effectively unstoppable. But it cannot protect you from yourself, cannot prevent you from becoming the very thing you've spent years trying to move beyond. He gestured toward the wastelands, toward the crater-pocked evidence of Vegeta's training. You come here to be alone, to practice in isolation, because some part of you fears what might happen if you truly unleashed your full capability around others. That fear is wisdom, Prince Vegeta. Perhaps the only wisdom you've allowed yourself to acknowledge. And I'm asking you not to dismiss it in favor of pride. The observation struck deeper than comfortable, cutting through defensive layers to touch something vulnerable and carefully hidden. Vegeta did train alone, did isolate himself when pushing limits, did maintain careful distance between his maximum capability and what he allowed others to witness, not from fear of hurting them, though that was part of it, but from fear of becoming the monster he'd been raised to be, the destroyer who cared nothing for collateral damage, because caring was weakness, and weakness was death. You're asking me to accept restraint, Vegeta said, the words tasting like compromise but sounding like understanding. To impose artificial limits on myself because the ring won't do it automatically. To choose to be less than I could be, for reasons that transcend simple power maximization. I'm asking you to choose to be more than you could be, Ganthet corrected gently. Power without restraint is just power, impressive but ultimately meaningless. Power combined with the wisdom to know when restraint serves better than force? That's something approaching genuine strength. The Guardian's expression grew more serious. The beings in those images I showed you, they all believed that unlimited power was the goal, that removing all constraints would make them truly formidable. And they were right, in a sense. They became unstoppable. But they also became indistinguishable from the threats they'd been recruited to oppose. Vegeta stood silent for a long moment, processing layers of implication, while the ring pulsed steady and patient against his finger. Part of him wanted to reject everything Ganthet was saying, to insist that his will was strong enough to handle unlimited power without corruption. That concerns about feedback loops and safety protocols were irrelevant to someone who'd survived everything he'd endured. But another part, the part that had stopped his construct army from striking down a defenseless Kakarot, the part that came home to Bulma and Trunks instead of simply training eternally, the part that had chosen to become something other than the destroyer Frieza had molded, recognized truth in the Guardian's words. His will was absolute. But absoluteness without direction was just chaos wearing determination's face. What specifically do you recommend? The question felt like surrender but sounded like strategy, acknowledging that seeking advice wasn't weakness if it led to better outcomes. Beyond vague suggestions about wisdom and restraint, Ganthet's expression lightened fractionally, as if this response was better than he'd anticipated. First, conscious monitoring of the feedback loop. When you feel the ring beginning to spiral, power amplifying while amplifying power, pause deliberately. Force yourself to assess whether the escalation serves your actual purpose or simply feeds the cycle. Second, practice creating constructs that require sustained focus rather than burst intensity. The ring responds well to steady determination, less well to explosive force of will. Third, he paused, seemingly choosing words carefully. Consider that your greatest strength might not be your ability to refuse limitation, but your ability to choose which limitations to impose on yourself. The final point resonated uncomfortably, touching the same realization Vegeta had reached after his sparring match with Kakarot. His will wasn't fragile because it could be broken. It was strong precisely because it included convictions about what he refused to become, lines he wouldn't cross regardless of what victory might cost. I won't stop using the ring, Vegeta said, needing that boundary to be clear. And I won't accept arbitrary restrictions on my training or capability development. But, the word felt strange, acknowledgement of compromise that would have been unthinkable years ago. I'll monitor the feedback loop as you suggest, and I'll consider whether every escalation actually serves my purpose or just satisfies my pride. That, Ganthet said, something like approval in his tone, is more than I expected and possibly all that I could reasonably ask. He gestured again, and the space between them rippled, beginning to fold in preparation for his departure. One final observation, if I may? Vegeta nodded, curious despite himself about what the Guardian considered important enough to add as afterthought. The ring chose you, Ganthet said quietly, not because your will was the strongest in absolute terms, but because your will was the strongest that could still be trusted with such power. There were beings in your sector with determination approaching yours, but lacking the complexity that makes you capable of growth. The ring saw that complexity, saw someone whose absolute will included provisions for evolution rather than just reinforcement of existing patterns. Don't prove that assessment wrong by becoming too rigid to adapt. Then the Guardian was gone, reality folding around him until empty air remained where he'd been standing, and Vegeta was left alone in the wastelands with observations that refused to be dismissed as easily as he'd have preferred. He looked at the ring, at the way emerald light caught moonlight and reflected it back in patterns that seemed almost alive, and felt the weight of choice settle across his shoulders. The weapon would give him anything he demanded: unlimited power, unstoppable force, the capability to impose his will on reality itself without constraint. All he had to do was refuse to acknowledge limits, push the feedback loop to its theoretical maximum, become the kind of warrior who cared only for victory and nothing for what victory cost. It would be easy, natural, even, given everything he'd survived and every instinct that had been carved into him through decades of trauma and rage and desperate determination to never be powerless again. But Ganthet was right about one thing: he'd spent years trying to become something other than the destroyer Frieza had shaped, had fought battles against his own nature that were harder than any physical confrontation, had made choices that felt like betraying everything he believed about strength, had slowly and painfully learned that power without purpose was just noise. The ring could make him unstoppable, but it couldn't tell him what was worth stopping for, what was worth protecting, what was worth choosing even when choosing meant accepting limitation. Those decisions were his alone. Vegeta created another construct, not a weapon this time, not armor or enemies or tactical scenarios. Instead, he shaped emerald light into something simpler: the view from Capsule Corp's balcony at dawn, when the city was just beginning to wake and the world felt suspended between night and day. He'd stood there countless mornings, watching light creep across rooftops while Bulma slept and Trunks dreamed, feeling the weight of responsibility that came from having people who depended on him for something beyond just raw strength. The construct scene was perfect in every detail, because his will when focused on protecting rather than destroying was just as absolute as when focused on combat. More so, perhaps, because this determination came from choice rather than survival instinct, from conviction rather than conditioning. He held the image steady, feeling the ring's response, not the spiraling feedback of battle lust, but something more sustainable, determination that could be maintained indefinitely because it served purpose beyond just proving strength. This was what Ganthet meant about sustained focus versus burst intensity, about will that had direction rather than just magnitude. Vegeta dismissed the construct and began walking back toward Capsule Corp, the ring pulsing steady and patient against his finger. Dawn was still hours away, but he found himself wanting to be there when it arrived, to stand on that balcony and watch light reclaim the world while the people he'd somehow acquired the responsibility of protecting continued sleeping safely. The Guardians feared his power, and perhaps they were right to. The ring in his hands was dangerous, not because he was weak, but because his strength came from sources that made conventional safety systems irrelevant. His will could push the feedback loop to breaking, could transform him into something unstoppable and terrible, could make him exactly the kind of threat the core was designed to oppose. But that same will, when properly directed, could also choose restraint. Could recognize that some victories weren't worth their cost. Could impose limitations not from fear but from conviction about what kind of warrior, what kind of person, he refused to become regardless of what power made possible. The ring had chosen him because his will was strong enough to be trusted with unlimited power. He would prove that assessment correct, not by unleashing everything the weapon could provide, but by demonstrating that true strength included knowing when to hold back. Even when holding back felt like betraying everything he'd survived to become. Even when every instinct screamed to push harder, go further, prove beyond doubt that no one and nothing could ever constrain him again. Even when the ring whispered that it could give him anything, everything, if only he demanded it with sufficient determination. His will was absolute. But that absoluteness, he was slowly learning, included the power to choose his own limitations. And in that choice lay strength more genuine than any amount of raw power could provide. Ganthet understood that. The ring, perhaps, was beginning to understand it as well, learning from his usage patterns that determination could serve purposes beyond simple force maximization. And Vegeta himself, standing in wastelands under a swollen moon while the ring pulsed patient and waiting against his finger, was finally beginning to understand that the question wasn't whether he was strong enough to wield unlimited power. The question was whether he was wise enough to choose not to, when wisdom served better than strength. The answer, he suspected, would define everything that came after, for himself, for the core, for the Guardian's fears and the ring's potential and the future of what happened when absolute will encountered weapon designed to amplify it without limit. He looked back one final time at the wastelands, at the crater-scarred evidence of his relentless pursuit of strength, and felt something shift in his chest. Not surrender, never that, but acknowledgement that perhaps there were multiple kinds of strength, and the one he'd spent his life cultivating wasn't necessarily the only one worth pursuing. Then he turned and continued walking, leaving the wasteland's silence behind for the complicated warmth of a home he'd never expected to find, with people he'd never expected to care about, carrying power he'd never expected to wield and responsibility he'd never expected to accept. The ring pulsed against his finger, steady and patient, waiting to see what he would become now that he understood what it offered, and what it couldn't provide no matter how much power it granted. Dawn would come eventually, as it always did. And when it arrived, Vegeta would be there to meet it, not as the destroyer he'd been raised to be, not as the weapon Frieza had tried to shape, but as something more complex and more human than either of those roles allowed. The Guardians would continue fearing him, probably. The core would continue monitoring his power output with concern, and the ring would continue offering unlimited capability, waiting for him to demand more than wisdom suggested he should take. But for now, walking through pre-dawn darkness toward a home that somehow felt more real than any planet he'd conquered, Vegeta found himself content with the choice he'd made, not to reject power, but to be more than just powerful. It was, he thought, exactly what his father would have hated about him. And perhaps that made it exactly right.